When we think of innovation, we usually think of startups, certainly not large corporations. Typically, people think if they want to be more creative or innovative, they have to leave the corporate world and either become an entrepreneur or at least look for a job with a newer and smaller company. But the idea that startups are the right environment to cultivate innovation might be more myth than truth. In fact, a lot of today's leading innovation is coming from enterprises such as Microsoft, Bosch, Nexus, Lexus, Analog, and of course Amazon. If that's the case, what are most of us overlooking when we see corporations as stifling rather than fostering the next big ideas? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here today. It's wonderful to have you as part of our international community that now spans over 100 countries. It's great to know that there are so many people around the world who are listening to this show and benefiting from the experience, insights, and wisdom of the many truly outstanding people who are guests on A Seat at the Table. I know I learned so much from each guest and gained such valuable perspectives on business and leadership. And in case you haven't heard, you can now ask our guests questions. You can do this by simply going to our website at seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. I'll include a link in the show notes as well. Today I'm speaking with corporate innovation expert Andrew Binns, who's co-founder of ChangeLogic, a US-based strategic advisory firm and co-author of Corporate Explorers, How Corporations Beat Entrepreneurs at the Innovation Game. He's worked at both McKinsey Co and at IBM, where he was involved in the company's Emerging Business Opportunity Program. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Andrew talks about why a large corporation is a better place for innovation than a startup. 5 ways that leadership can drive practical innovation within their organizations. The disciplined practices that companies like Amazon use to drive successful innovation, and why corporate explorers are the key to igniting growth in your organization. Before we get started, if you're a supply chain executive who'd finally like to put an end to information overload and get a simple, concise, fact-based summary of key market developments and shifts, then the current situation in sourcing is exactly what you're looking for. To get immediate access or learn more, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net, where you can get all of the details. That's thecurrentsituation.net. I'll include a link in the show notes as well. Now let's sit down with Andrew and find out why corporations are becoming innovation incubators. Andrew, it's really excellent to have you on the show today. I'm really excited about what you've been working on and what you're talking about, because there's been so much hype around startups being the drivers behind new technology, behind innovation, and the market's rewarded them with massive valuations, sometimes valuations we don't even know where it came from. And yet you say that startups are too unreliable to pin our future success on. What do you mean by that?
Well, firstly, thank you, Jane, for inviting me. I'm very delighted to be here. Of course, startups are an engine of innovation and growth, but it's more complicated than that. And the complications come from facts like this valuation situation. Whereas in the 90s and early 2000s, the so-called unicorns, firms with $1 billion valuation, were profitable at the point at which they went public. Nowadays, none of them are. We're betting tremendous amounts on the promise of business models, which is essentially all evaluation is. It is our bet that this will grow into something of value. And so what we have are many, many bets, and those bets have got bigger and more valuable. But a bet is not the same as an innovation. It's not the same as a scaled business. And so I think there's serious question marks about whether that's really the model that we should follow everywhere. It has its value. I'm not undermining that. It's just this sort of its dominance that I think is a question mark.
I think that's a really interesting way to frame it. And I think it's a very, very good point, because I've been scratching my head as well, looking at some of these things. And like you said, it's a bet. And oftentimes it's competitively priced in terms of the cost to customers using it, because it's subsidized, right, by venture capital. And once it goes public and at some point the market says you have to start showing a profit, how will that hold up when they have to raise prices or when there's different pressures on it? So we don't hear often about all the people who go public and never make it. You only hear about it when it's sort of these celebrity IPOs that start off big and fail. You wouldn't happen to have any idea of how many actually never make it out, once they get out of the starting gate, how quickly they
Yeah, the research on startups is notoriously challenging to actually get accurate stats. There was one person who calculated the odds of becoming a unicorn at something like 1/16 of a billion.
Oh, right? My gosh!
The actual odds are extraordinarily small, and relative to the number of businesses that start, right? So the other side of this, though, you mentioned we only see the good news stories. The other thing we don't see, and which I think is one of the side effects, is the number of businesses that are acquired by corporations at high valuations, but which never deliver on their business case.
Interesting.
Right? And so as a consultant, my firm, Change Logic, works with senior teams, corporations on innovation and growth. And one of the common problems we get brought in around is we bought this company for $1 billion. It had no revenue, but we thought that it would fit really well with our other capabilities. And it turned out that it didn't perform. What do we do? And the point is that these businesses, and I can't say any more about my individual examples for obvious reasons, but the thing about these instances is that they were businesses that are acquired were always too immature. And
that's interesting,
because the market values them at a certain level, the companies feel that they must be worth that, and they're not. Right. So it twists executive decision making, because executives are in a tough situation. They're looking for new sources of growth. They're looking to stay ahead of some pretty rapidly moving, disruptive, threats in the world. Right. And they see a startup that looks promising, and that maybe that's a short circuit towards the future. And very rarely is that the case.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, because when you look at it, maybe before we had unicorns and massive valuations and so forth, oftentimes companies acquired startups or smaller companies because it was, in a sense, considered cheaper and less risky than funding and developing that innovation in-house. I mean, that was, of course, right, when prices were lower. And by the time things were acquired, they were closer to profitability or profitable. But being acquired by a big company enabled them to scale, and enabled the bigger company to have innovation. Now, of course, as you're pointing out quite rightly, things have changed quite a bit. And I think it's interesting that you had mentioned that actually larger companies are now better positioned to be drivers of innovation. Can you share a little bit about how you see that?
For sure. So I wrote this book with my colleagues, Mike Tushman from Harvard Business School, Charles O'Reilly from Stanford, and it's called Corporate Explorer. And I mention it because the subtitle, How Corporations Beat Startups at the Innovation Game. Yeah. And this is kind of a counterintuitive, somewhat, controversial statement. But we make it because it does happen. Right. There are actual examples time and again of corporations managing to innovate and to create disruptive new businesses. But rather, as you said a few minutes ago, it doesn't make the headlines. Big company innovates again. It's not as exciting, right? So who am I talking about in this? I think a great example is LexisNexis, the online legal and information service, created LexisNexis Risk Solutions. It took some of its own assets, it bought some technologies, it then acquired another firm, it then built on top of that with some other developments. And so it, through a series of different steps, it made a move from we see the world will need our ability to what we might now call big data analytics around individual risk decisions. And we're going to assemble the things that it's going to take to get there. That's innovation. That is business building. And we get obsessed far too much in ideation, in generating new ideas. And new ideas are great, and we undoubtedly need them. That idea came from somewhere, right? That insight about a problem in the world that LexisNexis could solve. But it's not the same as just generating ideas.
I think that's really an interesting point, because you're right. I mean, ideas are important and creativity and innovation is important, but we've almost gone too far in the direction of ideas for the sake of ideas and solutions looking for problems, or trying to create a problem to fit a solution kind of a thing. And that's all well and good in specific instances. But in general, when you're coming from, like you said, from what LexisNexis did, because they were working in the field, had their hands in the clay, so to speak, they were able to identify a problem and work towards solving it in a more practical way. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
That's right. Innovation is not a function of how many people you get involved in the process. It's a function of how many people use the product or service that you create. Right? Yeah. It's about the impact you have in the world. And I think we get that mixed up for good reason, right? There is a perfectly reasonable need to generate involvement and engagement from employees. And there's some firms who've done this very well, like Adobe, who did get their organization deeply involved. But what they were doing was attaching them to the customer, helping to support a shift in their business model. They weren't trying to find new sources of growth in the way that those kinds of high involvement projects tend to do.
So you pointed out that companies such as Amazon, of course, that one would stand out to most people as being very innovative. Yeah. IBM, Intel, Microsoft, and Bosch are leading new ventures. Can you tell us about what they're doing and about how they're cultivating innovation within a very large corporate structure?
Absolutely. So I'd like to think about this as being 4 pieces to the answer.
Okay.
Piece 1 is a strategic ambition. Piece 2 is innovation disciplines. Third is what we call an ambidextrous organization. I'll describe what that means. And then the 4th is explore leadership. Right? So strategic ambition simply means that you have set your sights on achieving something at the scale of the opportunity or the threat of disruption. And so if you think about a firm like MasterCard under Ajay Banga, and what Banga did is he said, I want to wage a war on cash, and I want to convert a high percentage of the 85% of transactions that are today sort of manual cash. I want to convert them to digital processing. This was bold, but it was also operational. Right? It gave guidance. Or Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, right? This extraordinary story of a company that's gone inside of 7 or 8 years from a stock price of $23 to $500. Right?
Wow.
And Jensen Huang didn't do this by accident. He did it because he said, I see the opportunity to use our technologies to serve new uses in autonomous driving, in deep computing, and so on. And he said to his team, this he did involve, he said to his team, figure out how we can do this. What can we do that will build businesses in that end market? So ambition is really important. The second one is an innovation discipline. And this is, how do you ideate, incubate, and scale these ventures? And there are some really good tools out there. Like if you understand the problem that you want to solve in the world, like the MasterCard moving from cash to digital, then you need to be able to investigate and understand what kinds of solutions and ideate the solution to that problem. Then you need to incubate it, because your first idea may not be the right one, and you may need to test that with customers, develop out your solution, and then you need to scale. How do you convert that to revenue, get the customer access capability, capacity to scale? And then the third one is the ambidextrous organization. And this means to separate your new ventures from your existing business. This is really vital, Jane, is that if you're a large firm and you want to do these new ventures, you need to create some separation. Otherwise, the logic of the existing business will kill off the new, not intentionally, it will do that. And then explore leadership. And this is why we call our book Corporate Explorer, because in every one of these successful stories, there's a leader who mobilizes the company, who acts rather like an entrepreneur, but we should talk about the differences. And they mobilize the company around the opportunity. And these people at LexisNexis, it was Jim Peck. Jim came from the middle of the company, got the idea, worked his way up, got attention, mobilized support around the business that he then went out to build.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting trajectory, and a sort of a little bit of a different path, because sometimes it seems that in some companies, not all companies, but execs sort of feel compelled to champion or to bring in what you might call flashy, trendy, new solutions or technology that more or less wows the board of directors, so to speak, but is less practical for their end user, for the customer. I don't know if you see that, but it's come up in a few conversations and a few things that I've looked at.
Well, so the way that I think about this is the difference between inside out innovation and outside in.
Okay.
Right? And so that inside out innovation is, I've got a technology, where can I use it?
Right.
Or outside in, what are the customer problems that you solve? Now, necessarily innovation is a bit of both, right? It's always going to be a bit of both. I think this is one of the places where Amazon has a great discipline. And when you have an innovation that you want to propose, you complete what's called a PR FAQ, right? So PR is simply a press release with what customers say about why this benefits them. One page. And then FAQ, frequently asked questions about it, maximum 6 pages. And not PowerPoint, but text, right?
Right.
For forcing the logic. But that first piece of why are customers excited? What has it done for them that they care about? And that sort of forcing logic is so important, because this is the thing that along with the failed acquisitions, this will be the other reason we often get called into companies, is that they find that they've spent too much on innovation. This is one of those other kind of great mistakes that we think, is that corporations, we don't spend enough on innovation. No. Most of the time they spend too much. It's on innovations, on technology innovations or technical innovations. I don't want to pick on technology firms. It could be insurance. It could be financial services. It doesn't really matter. The point is that it's something that is a inside out product, technology, whatever. And the thing is, they develop it too far before they subject it to rigorous tests with customers. And as a consequence, they get themselves in too deep, they spent too much money, and it's almost too embarrassing to pull out. And so that is what drives a lot of lost investment in innovation in corporations.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point out that Amazon, which is seen as being one of the most innovative, rule-breaking, groundbreaking kind of a company in terms of the way they operate and what they've achieved, actually, as you've pointed out, and other people have as well, that they're very rigorous in terms of what they put their money into in innovation. You think that they just do everything and test everything because they certainly have the capital and the wherewithal to do it. But you're right, they are very, very rigorous.
That's right. And they show a number of different pieces of what you can do successfully. The other one, of course, is the famous two pizza team. Right. Is that when you come to this point of having an idea that's worth spending just a little bit of money on, not too much, right? Then and a team that can be fed by two pizzas, right? So that's the bounding of it. And then when you decide that team is successful, you then have what they call a single-threaded team. And so the point here is you don't mix over, say, oh, Jane, I know you're running $1 billion business. Would you mind starting this little venture on the side as well? Right? Because you know what's going to happen. You're going to take care of the thing that's generating all the profit.
Right,
and so
exactly.
The single-threaded team is then focused on how do we convert this thing that we've incubated into something that really is of consequence. So in some ways, this stuff is simple, Jane. The challenge is getting through the corporate kind of organizational challenges, the I'm going to mention the word culture, which stands in the way. And culture is just, what do we think we're expected to do around here? And if we think we're expected to drive profit rather than find new areas for innovation, then this is the outcome that we get.
Right. Yeah, I think that, I'm very glad that you brought up that point about taking a new project and giving it to someone who's already got something else to do. And it's so tempting in companies to do that because you don't want to have to take another person, hire more people on and so forth. But you're right, that new project will never get going because nobody has time to look after it and it's not a priority.
Yeah. But then the other risk is that you make it too separate. Right. So why is it that LexisNexis, Microsoft, Bosch, IBM, all of these businesses are able to create new ventures, right? And why do they have an advantage to startups? Well, they start with the assets. They have customers. They have technology. They have brand, right? They have manufacturing, service centers, right? And the question is, how do you use those assets that startups don't have to go faster?
Yeah, that's so important.
And that's about leadership, organization, but these are problems that are within yourself. You should be able to solve.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it just doesn't look as flashy and as attractive as startups, right? But a customer base and an established brand are actually fundamental to succeeding.
Yeah. In the book, we tell the story of the semiconductor firm Analog Devices, who make component level semiconductors, some of the best in the world, most important. And what they do is they build a new business that not only has silicon, but also has cloud connected analytics and solves a business problem for customers. And the business problem they solve a number, but one of them is how do you predict when a machine in a manufacturing plant is going to break down, right?
Okay,
and they have both a motion sensor and an acoustic sensor that they then can send to the cloud, do an analysis and say, oh, wait a minute, that's broken down, or this is about to break down, and allow people to intervene and then save money, right? So there's a wholly new business for them. Now, many people are interested in that market of condition-based monitoring of machines, lots and lots of players, lots and lots of startups. But only Analog Devices is there with, oh, yes, and we are 60 years old and have a brand reputation which says we never retire a part. And so that is a big advantage in the market, right? To be able to make those kinds of claims. And if you can use that kind of asset, there's tremendous potential.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes the most valuable assets are overlooked, right? Because, like you said, they don't have that sizzle, and yet fundamentally, that's the most important thing that they're bringing to the table.
They drive buyer behavior.
So you refer to corporate explorers, and you were saying that they're the key, right, to igniting innovation inside their organizations. What are they? I mean, how does someone get to be that, or is someone just naturally that way? How can organizations support this?
Yes. So this Jane is, where I started writing the book. Is I started to find that in all of the successful stories, either the ones that we were involved in creating or the ones that we came across in our clients or in our research, there was a character. There's an individual who saw something in the world they wanted to do something about. So one of the stories I start the book with is Christian Kurtish at the European insurance company Unica. And he's running their little Hungarian business. And he sees that from his point of view, insurance has lost its way. And it's stopped being the risk-sharing community that it originally was in the 17th century. And it's become more about administering policies and making sure that customers aren't stealing money, right, with fraudulent claims. Right. And he says, I want to reinvent this. And so he develops a passion for solving that problem of how do we reinvent that sort of community? And he develops a product called Share Risk, which is a digital platform for pooling risk, which I could tell you more about. But the point is, he had that passion, and that is absolutely core to the life of the corporate explorer. And nobody gave him the job. Hey, Christian, go figure out how we can reinvent the insurance industry. No. Right. He saw the opportunity, and so that's one. Then he had to figure out how to get attention in the organization, and the way he did that. Firstly, he did it with high ambition. Right. He didn't say, "Oh, we could, if we do this little digital product, we could get a little bit more." No, he went for the full. This is a radically new way of thinking, and the presentation he made to the CEO was so startling that the CEO's reaction was, this is a nuclear bomb underneath our industry. And if we don't respond, somebody else will, and we'll be in trouble, right? And so that's then next thing. And then thirdly, even based the great purpose and, great commitment to customers, great ambition and good storytelling. But he also had to make it so that the community in the company, the leaders in the company, wanted to make him successful. And this is where the corporate explorer is often different to the entrepreneur. They tend to be insiders, people who've been with the firm 10, 20 years, who have really strong social capital, relationships, and who are a known quantity. Right. That leaders look at them and say, Christian, oh yeah, he's successful, we trust him. And when the idea doesn't work out, they don't say, oh, it's him. They say, well, let's have a few months and experiment a little bit more with this, right? So it kind of isolates part of the problem. So corporate explorers, high social capital, trusted within the company, and that's what helps them to succeed. So in some respects, they're a little unlikely, right? And I sort of often hold my head in horror when I hear that companies are appointing entrepreneurs from the outside because they have no social capital. They're just left to drift. One of them that we talked to in the research for the book said it was like trying to paddle a canoe up the Amazon with a butter knife. Oh. Nobody wanted to help me. I didn't know anybody, and they just were waiting for me to fail because then I could leave and they could get on with their jobs. So this is, again, one of those sort of great sort of toxic myths that we have, that you have to bring in the entrepreneurs from the outside. And of course, you can hire entrepreneurs and skills from outside, but you've got to look for that corporate explorer who knows how to get things done in your organization.
I guess that's the delicate balance between, on the one hand, bringing in people because you feel that perhaps your own people like to keep doing what they've always been doing because it's comfortable and it's safe. And then at the same time, like you said, you bring in someone who's new, they have no social capital, they don't understand why the company does what it does. And sometimes as an outsider, things that look ridiculous or look wasteful or look inefficient actually is the best you can possibly get because there's other factors that you don't know because you haven't had, that hands-on experience. So I suppose it's a bit of a balancing act. I mean, how can companies deal with that?
Yeah, so I think that if you're a senior leader in an organization, the things that is good to pay attention to is, do I have a growth ambition? And does that growth ambition create a license to explore in the way that the Ajay Banga's did? Right. Or Jensen Huang's, or I could mention other leaders. Because, And then if I've got a license to explore, I also need to have some sort of boundaries around it, because you don't want to create a zoo with all these ideas.
Right.
You want to put what I call hunting zones together. You want to have some confinement to where you're interested in exploring. And then you need to create the opportunity for people to come forward with ideas, be they leaders of your business units, be they people like Christian, a little bit lower down in the organization. And then you've got to be willing to challenge your culture, right? Because the thing about starting new ventures is that it means relearning a few lessons. Most importantly, the lesson of experimentation. This point about not spending too much. Spend little bits and learn through trial and error, and then spend a lot when you've learned what the opportunity is and how you can convert it. And one of the things that happens in corporations is that people come under pressure to be certain far too early and to commit the organization to expense far too early. I was on with a company, a large American company yesterday, talking to a man who's running one of these ventures. And he's got a venture in one part of the world, and then there's a colleague in the other part of the world doing something similar. And he said, "I'm really worried, Andy, because these other folks are just doing what we always do. They're following the normal model of our business, and I think they're going to fail. But everybody's supporting them because they see it as the safe option. I'm busy trying to create something entirely new, and I'm running all of these experiments, but I don't have an answer yet. It will be safer for me just to spend all the money, even though I know it's going to be wasted."
Right.
And that's the cultural challenge right there, is the sort of the habits, the inertia that exists in organizations.
It's interesting that you're bringing that up, because you had made a point in your book that people look at corporations as no place for entrepreneurs, right? That you need to get away from a corporation in order to be an entrepreneur. And you argue the case that you can be an entrepreneur within a large company. And yet many people see large companies as stifling creativity, as, there's one boss and it's not you, just follow directions. So there's a lot of, whether that's myth or reality in general, of course, depends on each company. But people certainly don't see going to be with a corporation as being an opportunity to be innovative. I mean, how can companies overcome that without, like you said, creating a zoo?
Yeah, I think that these new businesses are sort of cultural incubators, right? And if you're able to get started on this path, ambition, hunting zones, a few experiments, and you're able to create this little bit of separation and start to do things in a different way, and make it not hidden,
Right.
but do make it separate, and allow that incubator to be something that sort of teaches the organization a different way of working, because this is one of the big lessons of the early 21st century, amongst some other ones which are more unpleasant, right? Is that we've got to learn to be more agile. We know that the digital revolution that we're all living through is requiring us to be more agile. It's breaking down all kinds of barriers between industries and changing new value propositions, business models, blah, blah, blah. But the secret to getting ahead is being able to do this agile experimentation thing. And you've got to learn, you've got to start learning, and creating this sort of cultural incubator is a great way of getting started on that journey.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to frame it, because I think that people look at something as a solution that they want to buy and execute or implement and get results. And I think using the word incubate puts it into the perspective that it's something that you need to nurture and grow, and that it will develop over time, hopefully into something that's a big contributor to your organization. But it will need time to grow and evolve. How much do you feel innovation is sort of short-circuited because people are more focused on immediate results?
Yeah, and it's a strong sort of human impulse. Innovation lives in this little paradox of, we are psychologically attracted to new things.
Right.
We want new things, and we love things that are ambitious and rule breaking. But the closer we get to the point where we have to commit to them, and as we do so, put at risk things we've already got, the more we decide we don't want them that much after all. Right? And this is the phenomenon that we call risk aversion.
Right.
And it exists in human behavior, not just in business behavior. And oh, by the way, it exists in private companies just as much as in public companies. And yes, there's a set of dynamics around the public markets and quarterly returns and all the rest of it, which are definitely difficult to challenge. But don't think that that's the whole issue. I work, I can't name the companies, but I work with three very large privately owned companies, and it's the same dynamic because this is a function of human behavior and the sort of the way organizations tend towards control and optimization. Right. This is the way that an S curve progresses. Right. That anything, human beings, the seasons, companies, doesn't matter. We all go through a progression from beginning to end. And the thing about a business S curve is the higher up the S curve you are, the more optimized you are around delivering the results you've got today. And the thing is that success is a sleeping pill. It stops you from looking at the future as well. And so you've got to, as a leader, you've got to make sure you break out of that phenomenon of being too wrapped up in what makes you successful today. You've got to think also about what's happening tomorrow and have a few experiments that position you for the future.
That is so true. And I'm really so glad that you pointed that out. Now, Andy, how can we find you? I mean, people would want to connect with you. I'm sure they're going to want to read your book. Where can they connect with you?
Well, find me on LinkedIn, Andrew J.M. Binns, and thecorporateexplorer.com or changelogic.com.
Okay. Well, I will make sure that all those links are in the show notes. They will also be over on our website at seatpodcast.com. And we also have a function now where you can send in questions. So if you have questions for Andrew, that would be a good way to connect with him.
Bring them on.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I totally appreciate your sharing so many insights, things I hadn't thought about. So I'm really glad that you brought them up.
Thank you, Jane. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. Your feedback powers this show. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Also, share episodes you found valuable on LinkedIn or other social media, and call out your biggest insight or takeaway from the program. And don't forget to tag me, Jane Singer. I'd love to see which episodes you like best. And if you have time, please leave a review on any of the major podcast channels. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, A Seat at the Table has a new feature. If you've ever listened to a podcast and thought, I have a question, well, now you can ask. I'll be letting you know about upcoming guests on our show, and you can send in questions. Also, you can ask questions after the show, and we'll forward them to our guests for feedback. If you'd like to participate or just want to learn more, head on over to our website at seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com for all of the details. The links will also be in the show notes. You can leave any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions there, and yes, I will read them. Thank you for joining me today and for supporting the show. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next episode of A Seat at the Table.